Welcome to the Fintech One-on-One podcast. This is Peter Renton, chairman and co-founder of Fintech Nexus. I've been doing these shows since 2013, which makes this the longest running one-on-one interview show in all of fintech. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this podcast, you should check out our sister shows, Pitch It, the Fintech Startups podcast with Todd Anderson, and Fintech Coffee Break with Isabel Castro. Or you can listen to everything we produce by subscribing to the Fintech Nexus podcast channel. Before we get started, I want to remind you about our comprehensive news service. Fintech Nexus News not only covers the biggest fintech news stories, our daily newsletter delivers the most important fintech stories into your inbox every morning, with special commentary on the top story of the day. Stay on top of fintech news by subscribing at news.fintechnexus.com/subscribe. Today on the show, I'm delighted to welcome Alek Koenig. He is the CEO and founder of Settle. Now, Settle is a really interesting company, started during the pandemic, and they offer basically accounts payable software combined with a working capital financing solution. And this is a perfect match, and you'll find out why as during this conversation, and how really Alek and his team stumbled on a vertical that was in desperate need of this particular product at that time. So we talk about that. We obviously talk about in some depth how the working capital product works, how it's underwritten, what kinds of types of data they use. We talk about some of the brands that are using it today. Alek talks about his time at a firm and how that has really informed how he runs Settle today. We talk about his Ukrainian team, the scale they're at, and much more. It was a fascinating discussion. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Alek.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's kick it off by giving the listeners a little bit of background about yourself. I see you've come out of a firm like many other people I've had on the podcast in the last 12 months. There's a real firm mafia happening in fintech, it seems, these days. But why don't you just hit on some of the high points of your career to date?
Yeah, our firm was definitely the last thing I did before Settle. So then to your point about the mafia, you can definitely feel it while in the company. There's just a lot of smart, ambitious people, and you could just see them doing great things. So I started off my career at Capital One back in 2008. So great timing to be in credit and lending. So I did a 2-year stint in auto lending, and then a 2-year stint in personal loans. And then I finished up my career there in the retail banking side. So I feel like that gave me a great purview on consumer risk. Mm-hmm. Then I got really infatuated with startups, and I figured the best way to learn about it is to join one. So I joined a tiny startup in LA, focused on non-QM mortgages. Did that for about a year and a half, and then I found my way to a firm back in 2015 and stayed there till 2019. So,
okay. So what was the impetus then to start Settle? What was the idea? Tell us a little about the genesis of the business.
Yeah, many people think it's just something I stumbled upon at a firm, but that's actually not the case. So right after a firm, a friend of mine asked me to take over as CEO of his startup. It was tiny, like 3 people. So I joined there. It was a try before you buy business. And I just couldn't really figure out the unit economics of it and how to make this work long term. So I decided to shut it down. And this was all within 2 months. So pretty rash. But during that experience, I was using this accounts payable software that I just thought was the worst product around. So when I was thinking about ideas after that, one of the ideas was, hey, let's just create the best in class accounts payable software for small businesses. So that's what was really the initiating idea. And then, when I think about building companies, I really think about, is there founder market fit? And, my background's really in credit and lending. So, I was like, well, if we could combine this with working capital, then I think those things would tie together. And in that case, I really think we could actually change the trajectory of these businesses instead of just saving them like a couple hours a week. So I interviewed a bunch of companies um, over the next month just to really determine if this is a pain point, and if this would be really appealing to them. And it just seemed to really resonate with a lot of companies. So that gave me enough impetus to actually kick things off. So I recruited the team that I was working with at that small startup to join me on this journey. And we started it all back in November 2019.
Okay, so did you launch with the working capital piece in place, or was it really more of a SaaS type product? What did you launch with?
We launched both with accounts payable software and working capital. I think when you hear from people like Vinod Khosla and whatnot, and Keith Raboy, they're really stressed on like doing the hard thing first. So if you could, really do the hardest thing up front, then it'll be a little bit more smooth sailing down the line. So for me, it was that kind of combo product that was very unique and would actually unlock these businesses. So we launched in the summer of 2020 with both working capital, actually two working capital products, and the accounts payable software. So I didn't know which working capital product would resonate. So we kind of increased our chances of success, and one of them took off, and that's kind of what we doubled down on.
Interesting time to launch a working capital product when like right in the height of the pandemic with the PPP that was already out there. Tell us a little bit about those early days. How was the traction?
Yeah. Initially, I think one of my biggest mistakes was really not thinking through the market deep enough. And we're kind of focused on like any small business. So, if you're a SaaS business or this business or e-com business, whatever, like this should work for you. And the initial traction was really from companies in the e-commerce channel. And once we kind of noticed that's where we just didn't do like a hard pivot or soft pivot really, but just really focus on e-commerce merchants. And so like, okay, this is our hero customer segment. This is who we're going to go after. We're not going to even worry about any other companies. And what really made sense then was because we're in lockdowns, all the retail offline channels, stores went offline. So everyone came online. So what that meant for these e-commerce businesses is that they're running out of inventory left and right. They have sold out products online, and what do they need to meet the increased demand is they need working capital. They need to procure more inventory. They need to procure more marketing. So it was just very, I think, fortunate timing for us to really take advantage of that. So, after getting our first 10 customers, I think the next 200 were all word of mouth. So these founders of these businesses were just spreading the word to their other friends or other operators, saying like, "Hey, this really helped my business. Like, you should check this out."
Okay.
So, the demand was insane for us, and we're just barely able to keep up with the demand.
So then maybe you could tell us exactly how the working capital product works. I mean, what are you actually underwriting on? Just describes the basis of the offering.
Yeah. So taking a step back, the core product is accounts payable software. So what does that mean is, we're really handling and managing our customers' invoices from their vendors. So we're ingesting those bills. We're reading all the information from there to enable one-click pay and scheduling. We allow them to categorize it so it'll sync into their ERP like QuickBooks, NetSuite. So once we handle all that, customer could schedule a payment to their vendor. So we could process that payment for them. Great. So the way I thought about the working capital product was, well, if these companies need to spend the time to actually, pay their vendors, why don't we just simplify that and, also introduce the lending decision there? So, hey, if you want to pay this invoice with your own money, great. If you want to pay with our money, aka financing, you could do that too, all with one click. So that's what we really enabled. So effectively, Settle will pay the vendor directly with Settle's money, and then the brand could pay us back anywhere from 30 to 150 days later. It's really depending on their cash conversion cycle. So for these e-commerce merchants, all of them have a very similar pain point where they need to procure inventory way ahead of time before they could actually get revenue from those inventory purchases. And the ROI is just so clear for them because, they have some gross margins on the product. So, if I procure things with the 60% gross margin, for example, I know I'm going to get much more money down the line once I sell through these goods. And I think, a lot of the logistics and freight stuff during COVID really elongated these cash conversion cycles. So
Right.
a product like ours just made so much sense for them. And it's very useful for these companies to actually tie specific loans to specific revenue from that specific inventory. So it's a very clean way of thinking about it.
Right. So it's really invoice financing. It sounds like is what you're offering, and I'm just curious about like you talk about some of the timelines. You said you go to like 5 months. I imagine for some of them that might not have even been enough, right? I mean, is that the maximum term that you'll go out?
Today it's 180 days.
180 days.
The maximum will go out. So I think for 90% of businesses that definitely works. For others, especially once they start, not only if they have a long procurement cycle, but then they're also selling into retail, and then those retailers are providing additional net terms for them. Then sometimes it could get longer, but for the most part, that kind of fits the bill. And generally, my personal view is, if your whole cash conversion cycle is longer than that, then that's a really difficult place to be.
Right.
It makes you less nimble, and it's harder to kind of predict, forecast the future.
For sure. So, but then obviously you've got a lot of these companies will work with multiple vendors, right? So they might have 3-4 main vendors that they're buying from. Do you then, they would potentially do 4 different types of 4 different kind of one-click applications then?
That's right. So, and our other view that's very different from the market in general is that I think most lenders will hey, deposit a bunch of money, you could use it as you wish, and we're just going to start charging you interest on it.
Right.
But I think what's kind of bad there is that you can't actually use all that money right away. Because most of this money is going to be sitting in your bank and you're just going to be paying interest on it, which doesn't make sense to us. So it's if we tie this to the actual payment out to the vendor, then you're only paying interest for money that's actually in use, which is going to reduce the overall cost to the merchant. I think, our companies might have, 20 different individual loans out at the same time. We keep all the, loan terms the same. So, we're starting the same flat APR across all these different invoices. But that product is a little bit different that way, where you might have 20 different individual loans instead of just one big lump one.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So can you take us through the underwriting process? How does it, are you underwriting on the company? What sort of data you're looking at to do this? Are you looking at sort of longevity? Just tell us how that process works.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved over time, but the data sources have remained the same. So my experience in, B2B lending is, credit reports are fairly junk. They're not as rich as consumer credit reports, so they're not as useful as you might think they might be. So we really rely on first-party data. So we're connecting into 2 data sources. Because we're the accounts payable software, we're getting access into their accounting software like QuickBooks NetSuite. And then we're also connecting to their bank account. So we use a few providers there. So effectively, for us to process a payment on behalf of this merchant, even if they're not borrowing money from us, we use one of these bank connections to fulfill that transaction. So that gives us access to these two data sources. So one is their accounting books. So we're getting stuff like P&Ls, balance sheets, and from the bank data, we're getting transaction data that goes back historically, and then also moving forward as well.
Right, right. And what are the range of terms like as far as interest rate cost on this capital for the end user?
Yeah, so we definitely abide by state APR requirements. So we're definitely not doing any merchant cash advances or anything like that.
Right.
Our APRs usually range from 12 to 24%. But then that also depends on state. Some states might cap that to be a little bit lower. And that's something we take into account. And the terms, as we mentioned, are really that kind of like 30 to 150, 180 range. And then amounts go anywhere from 50,000 to 10 million.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty broad range. And then what about the capital markets side? I mean, how are you funding these advances or what do you the working capital loans?
Yeah, I think very similar to what I kind of experienced at a firm. So we'll start off with some warehouse lenders. So our biggest warehouse facility is from Citi in Atalaya. So they're providing us a warehouse where we could pledge our assets, aka these loans. They'll give us a percentage of that back in cash. And then depending on the timing of this, we'll have announced another warehouse facility with another bank to help us keep scaling. But as you kind of think about the longer term playbook, at some point we'll do whole loan sales. At some point we'll do ABS deals, just to give us differentiate and diversified and also cheaper capital down the stack.
Right. Okay. So I want to talk about the accounts payable piece. What is it that you did that there's a lot of accounts payable software out there. What is it that you've done that makes this unique in the industry?
Yeah, the biggest thing I think is the user experience. It really looks like it was built yesterday, and it feels that way as well. So I was really trying to take the consumerization of business software. So really provide a consumer experience for software really aimed at businesses. And when we kind of think about who is our customer, it's really these e-commerce founders. And that's the kind of experience they expect. That's what they've experienced over the last 15 years. So we need to meet them where they are. So that's one of the biggest reasons. But because our product suite also offers, working capital loans, then the economics can be a little bit different. So effectively, we can make the accounts payable software very cheap because of that, and not have to, have specific gross margins we need to make on the software because we have this other revenue stream
Right.
that's very impactful to our business. And then I think the other thing is just it's very snappy, very quick. Payments are quick. I think relative to other accounts payable softwares, we're probably the fastest. And that's very important to these brands because, the trades that they're making really revolves around it. If we don't pay their supplier in China or somewhere else, then those goods might not get on the boat for them to get it, which really hampers their business. So we need to make sure we have the fastest payments in the industry.
Right. Gotcha. Makes sense. Okay. So then can you tell us some of the, what are some of the brands that you're working with today? Are there any brands that we might know?
Yeah, I think absolutely. We have Branch Furniture, which is one of these crazy growth stories where they had to do a pretty hard pivot during COVID, selling office furniture and turning that into direct to consumer was pretty meaningful for them. Lalo is a baby brand, which is just building some very unique, beautiful products. And really not only starting direct to consumer, but now they have their own storefronts to really help accelerate that. I think Alek is a very unique business where they're creating this, marketplace, membership style, selling goods directly from their suppliers. And then I think the list goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So I'd like to ask you about embedded finance, because you in some ways you're sort of a poster child for this whole movement, because it's really you're kind of embedding the payment facility and the lending facility into one experience. Like the fact that we are in a pretty sophisticated world now when it comes to embedded finance, how has that made it easier for you guys maybe to grow your business or to operate it?
I definitely think, there's a lot of infrastructure companies and that have really helped this make easier for businesses. So, from having international payments to working with banks, integrating with banks, has really helped us grow quicker and actually find product market fit much quicker. So when you kind of think about what we launched with, from domestic payments, international payments, lending, and software, all built with a team of 4 or 5 people. That's pretty amazing when you take a step back and think about it. 10 years ago, you probably couldn't do that. That's probably a lot of millions of dollars and a lot of people working at those things. But there's a lot of these like turnkey like solutions out there to help us do that. And when we're starting the company, the thing that I was thinking a lot about is, I think phase 1 were just like software companies. Phase 2 was really about embedding, payments into the software. But for me, it was really taking it to phase 3 or phase 4. It was like, hey, not only are we going to embed payments into the software, then we're also going to embed lending, and then we're also going to embed accounting. Because for me, if you're a business and any money is moved, that money needs to be accounted for. Mm-hmm. So why don't we just take that off your plate as well, and really save you a lot of time. So let's jump the gun there and do a lot more for your business than you might if you just go to some other company, and then you're going to have to do a lot of work on the back end to kind of reconcile all that.
Right. That makes sense. So I want to go back to a firm for a second. I had Max Levchin on the show just not that long ago, and he said some really interesting things about the entrepreneurial spirit inside the firm, which we touched on. But I'd like to kind of frame the question this way: if, like, from your time at a firm, how does that inform how you run Settle today?
Yeah. I definitely took a lot of things away from a firm. So at the startup I did before a firm, it was a small team, first time founder. So I think we definitely learned a lot of things, especially like a lot of what not to do at a startup. So one of my main reasons for joining a firm was, okay, I learned what not to do here, but I really want to learn what to do. And I was like, okay, Max has done this a few times. He's probably, best in the game. So if I could just absorb what that company does, what he does, I think I'll be in a better place. So I joined when it was about 50 people, left when it was about 800. So there's definitely phases within a company, and you can kind of notice like, okay, things need to change here to make sure we're firing on all cylinders. But I think the best thing I took away is just like the culture you built. So from, being very first principles thinking, being very collaborative, very humble, but mostly just like working your tail off. I think that's something the firm was able to accomplish, and that's something I'm trying to kind of partake here. So I think we have a lot of extra firmers as well that I worked with at Settle. So we're able to kind of like exponentially grow that kind of culture here as well.
Right. So when I was doing a little bit of research on you guys for this interview, I found that you have a Ukrainian team. In fact, they were part of I don't know if you have Ukrainian co-founders, but they were certainly early on, it seems like, in your development. What can you tell us a little bit about that? How are they still around? How have they been impacted? Because obviously, Ukraine has had some challenging times the last 12 to 15 months.
Yeah, it's definitely been very sad, very frustrating. But they're all powering through. I wish there was more we could do to help, but things are kind of like out of our hands. But yeah, the three people I worked with at the small startup right before Settle are all here at Settle as well. So really founding members. So I just thought they were so talented, so smart that I was like, I got to do what I can to keep these people employed. And so I pitched them on Settle back in the day. I actually they're in Lviv, Ukraine. So I actually flew there when I was shutting down the previous startup that they worked for and pitched them on Settle, and they all said yes. So yeah, they're just so talented.
Are they still there in Lviv?
Yeah, one person got out. I don't know if I should be saying that, but the other people are, and we've actually grown the team there. So I think there's about 15 people there now. They actually have, I think, the nicest office of any of our offices. Yeah, so it's mostly engineering team. I think they account for about a third of our entire engineering team. But some of design is there as well. So yeah, they're just such an integral part of the company. This isn't like a dev shop by any means. Like these are, everyone gets equity. I hope everyone here is for a long term. It's not viewed any differently than like a U.S. employee by any means.
Right. Gotcha. Okay, so can you give us a sense of the scale you're at today? Any metrics you can share on that?
Sure. Yeah. Hundreds of companies, still growing. I think the biggest thing for us was, for a long time, all of our growth was organic. So just this word of mouth. So the biggest investment we've been kind of making over the last really 9 months is really about building our own go-to-market motions. So organic growth is nice, but that doesn't mean you have a strategy or a playbook. So for us is, okay, what can we do to actually 3x, 10x this business? So it's a big DNA change for us because we have to build all these new muscles that we just didn't have. So that's been a lot of the focus now to kind of take this, okay, how do we get to, thousands of customers and then 10,000 of customers and so forth and so forth.
Right. So it looks like you guys haven't raised equity capital for a while. So 2021 was what I saw anyway. Clearly, fintech is a different environment for raising capital, today on the equity side anyway. What have you or how have you navigated this kind of this downturn and the fintech winter that some people are calling it? How are you kind of navigating? How have you changed your business in the last 12 plus months?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's fintech winter. I mean, I think it's just back to normal, right?
Right. We had a roaring summer, I guess.
Yes. Temperatures were too hot. Global warming. It was way too hot. But no, it's not. I don't think anything is bad. I just think it's more appropriate.
Right. Well, a lot of companies have done layoffs. It doesn't sound like you guys are part of that, but there's been
right. We definitely had employees ask like, "Hey, we're doing layoffs," and I was like, "Layoff who? We're too small." Everyone here is so critical. So I think for the longest time, I think I took a lot of pride in being very efficient and small team. And then I think during really the roaring summer, as you mentioned it, I was like, man, we should be bigger. Like we could be accomplishing so much more. And then as things kind of reverted back to the mean, I was like, oh, thank God we didn't overhire because that would have been very painful. So yeah, for us, we didn't do layoffs. So for us, it was really about just making sure we're not getting over our skis. So as long as we're reaching the internal metrics to drive this business and keep it alive, then we'll be a good spot. And I don't think anyone wants to raise equity. It just kind of brings in dilution, right?
Right.
Raising equity isn't a goal or anything. It just kind of resets the bar of what you need to accomplish. So I don't think it's really like a celebratory event. It just means you have new bosses you need to work for. So, we'll, because we raised a big round and brought in some great partners. So, brought in Ribbit Capital, which I admire a lot. For us, it's really about, it's more of a luxury. So like, hey, if we do all the things that we say we're going to do, then, we'll either be able to make the decision, hey, do we want to raise equity and kind of really grow the employee base from here on out, or do we potentially not want to and just continue, driving good business strategies?
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So last question, what's your vision for Settle? Where are you taking this?
Yeah. So we really want to build a very vertically focused payments network. So when you kind of think about what Settle is, we bring on a lot of our payers, you could call them that. So people who are paying other people. We're actually acquiring a lot of vendors as well. So effectively, we're starting to create this payments network. And because we're very vertically focused in this e-commerce CPG channel, we could drive a lot of efficiencies to both parties. Because one of the data that we have, but then two, also just like the payments network that we've been building. So the same way we're trying to solve cash flow issues for our brands and really build this cash flow management platform for them, where we could, give them the insights and information to make the right decision, but then also just give them the tools to make the right changes in their business. The same thing we could do on the vendor side as well. So if we know, our brands want to pay later, then we kind of know these vendors want to get paid sooner as well. So effectively, we want to use this payments, lending, and accounting for both parties for this ecosystem, and actually drive a lot of efficiencies to those parties. So that's kind of the vision that we're building towards. But we can't accomplish it in one day. So we need to, take these building blocks and really approach them sequentially in the right order to help us get us there.
Right. Interesting. Well, we'll have to leave it there, Alek. Best of luck to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please go ahead and give the show a review on the podcast platform of your choice and go tell your friends and colleagues about it. Anyway, on that note, I will sign off. I very much appreciate you listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.